Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be with you on this super full moon ceremony. I don't know if that means more bows, but I am ready for the Buddha workout. It's always wonderful when I come to the Zendo, the sights and the sounds and the smells. My skandhas are on fire. Yeah, there's a lot of it's when I come here, it's a mortar for the foundation of my practice. It really holds it together, and I appreciate seeing you all, and I thank you all for being here, and I thank you all for being out there in Zoom land. Before I begin, I will also give a shameless plug to my Monday, Wednesday morning, 6:30 meditation group. I see Steve, my regular partner in crime, on Zoom for that, and I invite you all to join us as well. It's a wonderful time in the morning, a great way to start your day. Today, I am going to be speaking about suffering. Obviously, a pretty broad topic that is something that you could study for your entire life, and as Buddhists, we do. As we know, it's kind of the crux of our practice, right? Our practice really stems down to the teachings of the Four Noble Truths. And what are the Four Noble Truths? Let's just quickly go over them if we could and how they relate to suffering. Soto Zen teachings emphasize the Four Noble Truths, which outline the nature of suffering. First, the truth of suffering. Life inherently involves suffering, whether through physical pain, emotional distress, or existential dissatisfaction. The cause of suffering, the root of suffering, is often linked to attachment and desire. The thirst for what we do not have, or the fear of losing what we do have, leads to ongoing dissatisfaction. The cessation of suffering. It is possible to end suffering by letting go of attachments and desires. This cessation is not about eliminating life's challenges, but about changing our relationship to them. The path to cessation, the Eightfold Path, provides practical steps to alleviate suffering, including right understanding, right intention, and right mindfulness. I think sometimes, especially when we're new to the practice, and even when we're not new to the practice, we sometimes have a misconception with regards to what suffering is, how we interact with it, and what it means to our practice. And for me, that really came to light, and I saw my, not misconception, but maybe my lack of a full conception of what really dissatisfaction is in our practice. I was here one morning, many, many moons ago, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, and I was in the back room here with Peter and with Cody. Some of you know Cody, and obviously Peter. And there was somebody else with us. I don't remember who it was at the moment. Maybe it was one of you all. But Stacy was also with us, and many of you remember Stacy. Stacy was a longtime student who became a priest here, and rest her soul, she's no longer with us. She passed away a few years back. But Stacy said something on that day that completely changed the way I looked at suffering, and therefore the way I looked at my practice. And she said this. She said, at home, I have a room where I sit. She said, and in that room, I have on the wall a diagram of perfect posture for meditation, a perfect full lotus posture. She had this on the wall. And she said that often when she was meditating or before meditation or after meditation, that she would look at that image. And she said it would immediately bring her suffering. And so in that moment, both myself and I remember Cody kind of looking at each other and very like, because clearly for Cody and I, that was not the same definition of suffering that we were working under. We were working under a different foundation of suffering than Stacy was. And Peter said that what was being described by Stacy was the essence of the dissatisfaction that leads to the greatest suffering in our lives. She wasn't speaking to physical suffering per se. She wasn't speaking to putting her hand in a fire. She was speaking to something completely different. She was speaking to what I just addressed here in the root of suffering is often linked to a desire. The thirst for what we do not have leads to ongoing dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction. This is a part of our practice of our lives that really is something that not control, but that you can definitely work on and improve your relationship with, because that's really what it's about. It's about your relationship with your suffering. What is your relationship with your suffering? I had a talk a few months back about thoughts and emotions. Take a look at that. Thoughts and emotions. How do your thoughts and emotions, how do they flow as a result of your relationship to your suffering? So let's think of an example that we're all aware of. A Vietnamese monk immolates himself in the street. Okay? I don't want to make any, I don't want to even begin to think or say that I have any conceptions of what he was going through, experiencing in those moments. But I will say this, that I think that a lot of people, especially those outside of Zen, and even those within Zen, may look at this and think to themselves that he had the ability to completely disconnect himself from the experience of immolation, of possibly the worst possible suffering that you can endure. Did he disconnect from it? I think, again, I don't make any claims to knowing, but I think it may be more so that his relationship changed with that pain and he grew deeper into it and completely changed his relationship to it. In what way did he change it? Well, he no longer was clinging to the physical pain. He was no longer, while he was clearly experiencing that pain in that moment, the way he was experiencing it, his relationship to the pain, and the way that he was able to, I don't want to say be at one with it, because be at one is not, it's just too, but you understand what I'm saying. He just changed his relationship to that pain. And so that's something that we can do, but in a different way, but on the same level with our daily lives. This is an example of a heightened sense of changing a relationship, right? Immolation. But in our daily lives, we can always change our relationship with our suffering, because the majority of our suffering comes from dissatisfaction. It comes from us being unable and or unwilling to accept the things as they are, suchness, Everything is as it is. And when we are unable to accept the things that happen to us in this moment or in the previous moments, or if we're constantly thinking about what might be happening to us in the future, bless you. Oh no,
Sorry.
you don't have to apologize to me, Jane. I just love being here with you. Every sneeze is wonderful for me.
I'm so sorry.
But it's really about when we're going through our daily lives and something happens to us and it wasn't what we thought was going to happen or what we wanted to happen, what happens? Dissatisfaction with that moment, dissatisfaction with what is happening with our lives. It's something that isn't necessary, right? This is something that you're experiencing. It's thoughts and emotions, really, right? These things happen to you in this moment, and then you're creating pictures in your mind of what happened. Actually, didn't happen that way, probably, or what might happen, painting pictures of what might happen. But none of that is real, right? None of that's real. But that is what is creating the dissatisfaction and the suffering. The dissatisfaction is part of that suffering. Okay? So let's talk about the different types of suffering that basically both Theravadan and Mahayanan teachings are close to the same when it comes to different types of suffering. And look, nobody ever said that when you reached enlightenment that you weren't going to any longer experience things that aren't something that maybe you want to experience. To the contrary, Mel Weitzman once said that don't expect that enlightenment is going to be this wonderful and joyous thing that suddenly cures all of your woes. That's not what's going to happen, and that isn't what our practice is about. Our practice is about living our real life and experiencing it as it is. So there are 8 types of suffering in Buddhism. The first is birth, the suffering inherent in the process of being born. I don't think this really, I mean, you could relate that to the physical, but like with all the suffering we're talking about, I think what this more so is about is there's a story about Suzuki Roshi, and he was, as I recall the story, and Jane might be able to clarify it for me, they were on their way to Tassajara in a vehicle, and they were passing by a waterfall. And as they were passing by the waterfall, Suzuki Roshi explained that that waterfall was really an excellent metaphor for birth, life, and death. As you're coming down the river, and basically at that time, there is no you, the river. It's just everything, the waves, all of it is, again, I don't want to say one, but you understand what I'm talking about. Then you cross the waterfall line. And in that moment, you separate from it. It's an illusion of separation, and also clearly a physical separation as well, because now it's mist, now it's droplets, now it's separated from the whole. And the falling represents life as you fall through life. And then as you reach the bottom, you again become part of that one. I'm going to say one. I'm going to have to think of another way to say that. We're going to have to figure it out. But you understand what I'm getting at here. And so what he was saying is that's some pretty traumatic experience, right? You go from basically this experience of feeling no separation, this feeling of complete Buddha nature, and then you cross the line. And suddenly you're in this whatever. That's pretty traumatic, and that's the first suffering. The next suffering is aging, associated with growing old, deterioration, body and mind. We all know the story of the first time the Buddha, there's that story, he's first time he leaves the palace and he goes saying that's the first time he sees sickness, aging, old people. He'd never seen that before. All that suffering that they were experiencing. Illness, the pain and discomfort of illness, death, the suffering and fear associated with dying and the unknown, being separated from one's loved ones, being together with one's hates, not getting what one wants, and the suffering of the five skandhas. The majority of these, though, get back to what we spoke about, and that is that it's only when you cling to the moment's experience and take it with you after the moment that you suffer. If you were not to cling and if you were not to carry, that is cessation of suffering. That's the definition of it. When you don't carry it with you, the carrying of the dissatisfaction is the suffering. So I want to get into I was going to get into the Eightfold Path, but I think that's a little too weedy for today. So just a few things to talk about real quick in regards to this. So non-clinging and letting go. The absolute best way for you to learn how to do this is to meditate. There is really no other substitute for that, in my opinion. You can try everything you want, but in my opinion, learning to be in this very moment and just sitting on that cushion and learning to leave everything on that cushion, that is a practice that cannot be substituted for. It just can't. An acceptance of impermanence, aging, death, all of these things, that is just, we need to come to the understanding that that is what it is. You're never changing that. And your dissatisfaction with it only creates suffering now, which becomes a snowball effect and can destroy your life. Suffering can destroy your life, but you do not have to be tied to it. Your practice here, your work on the cushion, your understanding and learning that thoughts and emotions are not you. They're just there to teach you things, teach you about life, help you to survive, but they are not you. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. Compassion and wisdom, compassion for others, so essential. The cessation of suffering cannot happen without compassion for other people. And with compassion must be attached wisdom. The two always have to be together, compassion and wisdom. And when we have those two things, and we go through life and we act in every moment in a way that is in line with the precepts and our practice, that's when we're going to let go of all the things that create the dissatisfaction and the suffering. So that's my talk for today. I hope it was in some way enlightening for you, and I hope to be able to speak with you again soon. Thank you. Any questions?
Chris Berman.
Chris has a question. I don't have to do anything. Okay.
Hey, thank you for the talk so much, John.
Yes, happy.
I didn't really have a question, but especially the last little bit reminded me of this quote that has stuck with me for 14 years. And it was from a talk that Victoria Austin gave who, if the folks didn't know, will be helping out enormously as we do our first practice period as a Sangha beginning later this month. But in any case, and this sort of ties Zazen to basically what Buddhism is all about. And so it goes, this slow immersion in the texture of human suffering is one of the cornerstones of our school. It's our daily vitamin. And I just love that practicing Zazen gives us a chance to study the roots and the manifestations of suffering. And the more we sit Zazen, the more we can study. So thank you for turning the wheel of Dharma on this topic, John.
Thank you, John. It was a great talk. And, you know, I relate to suffering as our desire for things to be different than they are.
Exactly.
And so we suffer. And I thank you for the wonderful story about Stacy and Peter. I could almost imagine it happening. And when she looked at that picture, you know, she suffered, but not right then, right? It was just the clinging to it, that self-judgment. Then she suffered.
Yes.
But she had the ability, she had the choice, because she's aware of it, to leave that picture up and not suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And that skill.
Yes.
So,
That was part of her, because the thought would be, well, why put it on the wall at all? Why have that on the wall if you know it's only going to create suffering for you? Because that gave her the opportunity to practice, the opportunity to let go of that in that moment. In a situation, right? She had herself in her Buddhist lab, right? She was sitting, she's on her cushion, she's in the best case scenario. So why not in that time create that for yourself? Why not create it when you're in the best scenarios to make the right decisions? Because if you practice something under those conditions, then you can carry it out into the world with you. That's really what we're doing here, right? This is a little Buddhist laboratory, right? Everything is exactly as it should be for you, right? It creates a scenario for you where you can let go. And so you can practice it, because when you go out into the world, it's not like this, is it? There's no nice little cushion for your butt. No, there's not. There's a lot of antagonism. There's a lot of folks who really don't care if you are, in your right moment then or not. I just want to add a little bit. I forgot, I have a great story, and this kind of ties into what we're talking about a little bit. And I just want to give it real quick. So I was at a seminar for work, and there's a guy there who specializes in kind of conflict resolution and stuff like that. And he gave an example. He said, when you start a conversation with somebody, you have 4 markers. He said, the markers just represent kind of, let's say, parts of your brain. He said, as soon as something happens in that conversation that isn't what you expected, right, and starts to create suffering for you, you drop a marker. He's like, what does that mean, you dropped a marker? He said, well, that means your cortisol levels just jumped. He's like, your cortisol levels just jumped. So he said, what does that mean? He said, well, you all know what that means, because he said you all experience it almost every day. He said, each of you at that moment have a physiological reaction. Maybe it's, you can feel that heat, right? When something starts to happen and you start to feel that heat well up. Or maybe it's in your stomach and you start to get that. All of us have these physiological reactions, and it starts to happen. The cortisol goes up. He says, and if it goes further, he says, now you've dropped another marker. He says, now you're working with nothing but your lizard brain. He said, and that happens rapidly. He said, the only way to stop it, he said, is to be in that moment, to know yourself so well that when that heat starts to rise, When that little feeling you feel, you start to feel it, he said, that's when you immediately need to start breathing exercises and going through, but difficult, right? What if I'm at work. Hey, boss, sorry, I just dropped a couple markers. I'm going to need a little bit here in order to get myself together so I can continue. It's hard to do, right? Something we really have to practice that. But what he said was something else he said, super important that we should think about. Once your cortisol levels go up and they go up past that level to where now you're only working with your lizard brain, you're doing that for at least 18 minutes minimum. That's the minimum amount of time. Even if once it gets high, if you start breathing early and work on it, you can keep the cortisol levels from getting too high. But if you don't, and the cortisol levels get there, you're now at a point where it takes 18 minutes, even if you're breathing. So what do we do in those situations? We need to know that we're there. At least know that you're there. Don't make any big decisions. Don't say anything stupid. Just, you're gonna have to survive for 18 minutes. So suffering, a lot to deal with. Thank you, sorry to add.
No, that was good. You know, we talk about, you know, the before thought, before the spark of thought.
Yes.
And, you know, once you have that thought, if you don't hook on to it, it'll go away in 90 seconds. What you're talking about is when one becomes two.
Yes.
And when one becomes two, it becomes 3 and 4 and 5. And, you
We've
know,
all been there.
at the first 90 seconds, you could breathe.
Mm-hmm.
But
If you can put the brakes on.
So this is
Yeah.
a real visceral occurrence in my life every day.
All
And
of us, right?
Everybody's life.
All of us, right? Yeah. Jane, did you have something?
Yeah, we all have that kind of experience, I think, so
Mhm.
it's well spoken about. I was just gonna say that actually there's another side to suffering, that it prepares you for a jump, you know, when you're sitting. Like when you're sitting and you have a lot of suffering or criticism inside rolling around, you can make a great effort to just let go of it and see what happens. You can't do that when you're feeling very good and normal, but when you're in this state, it's almost like you're hanging on to another person. And you can just pull your hands away and let it go and see what happens. And I think it's a very good thing to do, because the suffering of Zazen can be really hated for a while. For me, it was the boredom of it until the pain took over. But either way, it's a good practice in that situation where you say, oh, I've had enough of this, let whatever's gonna happen, happen. Just give me whatever it is. If it's gonna get worse, let it get worse. If I'm gonna faint, let me faint. If I'm gonna cry, let me cry. Whatever happens, it's okay. I'm happy in this horrible situation. And when you do that with genuine meaning, at first it won't be, but when you do struggle to let it go, you can have a very interesting understanding of yourself, because you let go of something in yourself that's trying to control everything. And that other self that's working on you is just yourself, and that is something you can completely let go of. But you can't do it in any situation other than being frantic over pain or some kind of suffering.
Thank you, Jay.
I'm gonna kind of go on the sideline of this. This morning on the train, when I came over, it hit a bump and it threw my back out. And you talk about suffering, it's like, okay. But am I right, or is it a good concept to have? Concept is a fuzzy word. That I've kind of learned, I've been like this ever since I joined the Sangha. And it almost becomes a way of strengthening my practice, because when everything's fine, you can, just go along, but when you have to overcome something and still stay focused with your practice and stuff, can it be considered possibly a learning tool that if you have chronic pains or anything like that, that like you say, you let go of it, but in another way you can use it to strengthen your practice, because if you can overcome that with your practice, would that be considered still letting it go if you use it as a tool to strengthen your practice?
Suffering is absolutely a learning tool. I mean, just its basic definition, like, watering it down. I mean, you put your hand in the fire, you're going to suffer, and you're going to learn not to put your hand in the fire anymore. So on that level, absolutely a learning tool. But then also on the level that you're talking about, it's absolutely a learning tool. Yes, Jane.
We had a Sanchiki ceremony at the end of a practice period. And it's one where the teacher sits and all the students come up and ask anything they want. And that was the time I went up, and Peter went up before me and he said, "Suzuki Roshi, do you have a question for me?" And he was like this, and he could get a really thunderous looking expression. And Suzuki Roshi looked at him and said, "Yes, I have a question for you. Why are you so serious?" And then my turn came and I was practically crying. And I quoted something from the Lotus Sutra about the house that's burning and the children in it are playing and don't realize that's what's happening, and that's like us playing in the world. And actually our house is burning and we have to get out of it. And so I said, I have a terrible time and sitting in all this suffering and everything. And I said, and I feel like I'm in that house that's burning, and how do I get out? And he laughed again and said, "You will get, when it gets hot enough for you, you will find a way."
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to it right there. I mean, yes, even look, we're not always going to be able to let go of our suffering. That doesn't mean you're not learning from what's happening to you. You're constantly learning every moment of every day of your life. Jane once told me there are two purposes in your life. One is to learn and the other is to help people. That's basically it. So, yeah, definitely essential and a part of learning. Yes, question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
Hi, Xander.
Xander, nice to meet you,
Nice to
Xander.
meet you. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
your talk. One thing that and I'm fairly new to Buddhism, and one thing that is in my mind as you talk about suffering is the relationship of the Buddhist to the suffering of others.
Mm-hmm. Empathy.
Empathy, right? Well, and is, we talk a lot about building compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that the key to finding compassion for others is empathy. Mm-hmm. and experiencing the suffering of others.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, experiencing the suffering of others, do we aim to hold it without changing it? Accept it as it is?
There's also, you don't have to hold all the suffering. There's also sympathetic joy, which is one of the Brahma Viharas. So you could take great joy in the joy of others while experiencing their suffering too. So one doesn't rise without the other.
You can be aware and empathetic to other people's suffering and have compassion for them without attaching yourself to their sorrows. And there's a difference between seeing somebody in pain, working to help them and relieve their suffering, and carrying their suffering with you. You have to understand there's definitely a difference there. Carrying another person's, that's something that's also a part of, we won't get too into it, but toxic relationships. When you begin to have another person's sufferings thrust upon you, and you don't have the tools to be able to properly deal with that and to let go, that's about as toxic as it gets. Okay. So, yes.
I agree, but I was thinking also that when your house gets bigger and bigger from sitting, that you not only meet these toxic situations, you invite everyone in. And you don't care if their muddy feet make marks all over your house and mess up all your cushions and everything. You just invite them in, and I think that's what sympathetic joy really is. You bring them into your house and you tell them, it's okay, you can mess up the place as much as you want, I'll fix it later. And the more you do that, the more your sympathetic joy is refined for people and will help them.
Just remember though that when Jane talks about opening that front door, she's talking about letting all that suffering in. Don't forget, you don't serve the suffering tea. There's I don't know if you're aware of the metaphor, the little story, but Suzuki Roshi used to talk about how, your thoughts and emotions and sufferings, you offer them into your house, but the back door is always open. You don't offer them tea. They come and go. And you're not jumping on it with them.
I just had a thought about what you were saying about, accepting the suffering of others, and that makes me think of there's a separation between accepting it and doing something about it. And also taking on the suffering makes me think of the term boundaries, and but having a boundary there can maybe make it easier to help the suffering of others. You know what I mean? Those are just a couple thoughts I had.
Jane?
I'd like to add, that's a good comment, I think. I love what everybody's saying about this. It is a good topic. I was thinking that when you invite people in and you take on their suffering, it's the same as if you were in the Zenyo, we exchange feelings and practiced with each other. And when you take on the suffering of another person, it's okay because you know how to let it out and they don't. So you take on their suffering and then in meditation you let it flow out of your being. So you don't have to keep it, but you do have to help someone who's stuck with it and can't do a thing about it.
Yeah, love it. What Jane's speaking of is loving kindness. In our practice, we want to cultivate loving kindness. I ask every day as part of my morning prayers, that I receive loving kindness that I can pass on to others in order to relieve their suffering. So you cultivate loving kindness, you give it to others in order to relieve their suffering. That doesn't mean you're grabbing onto their suffering, right?
But you can grab onto it.
You can grab
When
onto
you
it.
see that someone can't get rid of it, you take hold
Take
of
on it yourself.
And then you sit in meditation, just let it flow out of you.
Cultivating the loving kindness in order to relieve yourself of that suffering, healing yourself.
You don't kill yourself when you take on suffering. You just know how to release it. And the one you're helping doesn't know how to release it, so they're just frying themselves within the suffering. And you just give a hand by taking it and saying, oh, I can carry it. It's like helping someone with a big bundle. You take it, but then in meditation, you let it go. And that's what we all do in practice. We let our sufferings flow out. And once we let ourselves flow out, then we start to look and let other people in. You don't have to serve them tea, as he said, but you can just take it and let it be and give them help with their weights.
Thank you.
Because then we sit, and when you sit, you can release everything. You don't have to hang on to your own or to somebody else's suffering. But you see people who can't let go
Yeah.
and who are dying because of their suffering. And then you just help them out with it. And when you do take on the suffering, you learn a lot about people that way.
Yeah.
You learn a great deal just about the feelings of people, other people.
Well, that's empathy, right, Jane? I mean, isn't
Yeah,
that
you
it?
do
Isn't
really
empathy the
develop
taking on somebody else's
Yeah.
suffering? Isn't that taking it on?
It is, the empathy grows up, but it's more refined. At first you just say, oh, I can see you suffering, yeah, I don't want it, but when you let in some of the suffering and you know you can release it in meditation and somebody else can't, then that's refining your empathy and your loving kindness and your compassion. That's what I think.
I think it all has to do with your intention. I mean, you could have the best intention to take on someone's suffering, but not still be in an egoistic place. And that always ends poorly, right? And, you know, I think if you're in a place in your life where you could empathetically take on someone's suffering skillfully and hold space for them and let it go, well, that's a lot. But, you know, it's what the practice is. This is the practice.
That's basically being a bodhisattva.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, something is that we come into this life and we are just light, and we are taking on things that we had know nothing about. And we do that because that's all we learn about this whole world.
I think we had one more comment over here.
Steve's also got his hand up on Zoom.
Oh, thank you, Steve. I didn't notice your hand up on that. Thank you, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to share an experience. I think the comment that was made and kind of relates to what was being shared is about compassion and wisdom. I think you were very specific about emphasizing that, and my personal experience has been, the very few people that I really care about very closely, when I see them suffering, the compassion that comes naturally. But it's hard, and there almost has to be a pause for me at least, because if sometimes my actions are actually to relieve my suffering, and it's hard to see it right away, right? Because I want to act because it's so uncomfortable to see somebody else suffering, and sometimes the best thing I can do is do nothing for a little while to see what
The wisdom to know to do nothing or how
and I
to.
struggled with that. I came here for meditation on Tuesday, and the people that were here saw that, and it took me a little while to get distance from it, because there was an egoistic assumption, and there was something I could do to help this individual based on my knowledge, but it was a fine thing, and there's a concept of not giving somebody the dignity of their own decision making, because through their suffering they learn certain things, but I had to pause, and eventually I did end up talking to that person, and I was able to help them in a different way than I initially thought. I thought they needed help, and asked, how can I help them? So it's not an easy thing. And the second point I wanted to make is there's a Zen teacher in New Mexico. I think her name is Joan Halifax. She has a whole book. She's also an anthropologist
Yeah.
who worked with a lot of people who needed a lot of help, I think, in the Himalayas and all the other places. And she gets really deep into it and talks about empathic distress. And I'm not going to even try to attempt to say what she said, but about the difference between compassion and empathy and empathic distress that can really lead to poor decision making if you get caught in that. And she goes into a whole book on that. So it's a really
Yeah,
big
that's
topic.
why the importance of wisdom and compassion together is super important. Steve, you're up, my friend.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Steve.
Your topic was perfect for me. I looked at my wife the other day and I said to her, I go, man, I feel so disillusioned right now and just so just and it's the funny part is I got a great life. I really don't have a lot of worries or nothing, but I have kids. And I remember
Only
a
as
long time
as your
ago,
saddest child.
dissatisfaction it was yeah, it's but anyway, I remember asking Peter one time why he didn't have children, him and Jane. And basically, it was they caused suffering, and we didn't feel that this was the right thing. In our line of work, this was not the right thing to do. So, I, 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 I really like what you had to say because it kind of came full circle for me of why I was feeling the way I felt like a total fraud when it comes to Buddhism. I was like, and the funny thing is, when I first started interacting with my daughter, she had two kids back to back, and now her and her boyfriend are Splitsville, and it's created. She wants to co-parent, but he's being a little kid that's hurt, and in the beginning of our conversations, I would kind of, use things like letting go and this and that. And then I started to realize that um, she's been in drama since she went to college, so there was a switch in me where I wanted to tell her some things, but tried to keep the kid gloves on. And yeah, that doesn't work out too well. So I need to just go back to, letting it go. But I realize not only that, I have a handicapped son who his mom moved him to Cleveland about 4 years ago, and he hates it there. And I begged for him to stay where he was in California and whatever. And so I'm dealing with his emotional upheaval stuff. So yeah, no wonder I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. I feel like, I don't have all the tools to let this go. And you and everybody there talking has helped me realize that, I had a big anger problem when I first came in, and I realized that I get some kind of thing from it, that emotional, that rush, and once I pinpointed that, I was able to, because then remorse afterwards comes into play. So I realized I can skip the remorse if I realize I'm getting, yeah. And the same thing with what you said and everybody else about this situation is I have to be able to, I want the best for her, but in the same turn, I want the best for me. And the only way for that to happen for both of us is for me to let go of her pain and suffering because I've taken that on into my life. So I just wanted to share that. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Steve. Really, really appreciate you sharing with that with us today. And yeah, I know that's really hard. I'm going to prescribe an extra 30 minutes of meditation a day for you, and we'll see how that works out.
And you'll get his bill.
I hope you've got a good PPO. I can't read the name. Oh my gosh, my eyes are.
Visa?
Aviza, you're up.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. That was very enlightening. I had a question regarding
I age
to
enlightened.
like grief and loss. So applying this concept to losing loved ones, because for me personally, I don't have a fear of myself passing away. It's the dealing with the others around me and the like especially if they pass away very young and unexpectedly, and you have this image in your mind of a whatever, a life, a future you have with this person, and then all of a sudden boom, it's cut off. And I find
Yeah.
that everything else in my life is fine, but that's one thing that I suffer with pretty much daily, is that a person in my life who just suddenly passed away, and I have to like somehow find the acceptance, how do you feel one could apply what you spoke about today to an issue like that?
So first, I just want to say to you, I, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I too have had, my mom just died a couple of years ago. She was hit by a car while walking her dog, and Peter's recently passed. And so, there's been a lot of loss in my life as well. And I've definitely been working through this. And, the answer I have for you is probably, I'm going to tell you right now, not going to be very satisfying for you in this moment, but I'm going to tell you a story that Dogen told to a student. And if you're not familiar with Dogen, he is basically the father of Soto Zen. And this very situation was brought to him. A woman came to him distraught with her dead baby in swaddled and carrying her dead baby to him. And she knew that he was full of wisdom, and was going to him to ask him to somehow bring this baby back for her, or in some way change the situation from what the reality really was. And the reality really was that, she had passed, her child had passed. And so at that point, Dogen said to her, I want you to go to every home in the village, and I want you to find a home where there has been no loss and no suffering with regards to loss to the people in that home. And so she went forth and she visited every village home, and she spoke to everyone, and in hopes that she could, he told her that if she found one where there was no suffering and brought back a coin from those people, that he would help her. She came back coinless and said that she had found no home where there was no loss. She had found no place where there wasn't suffering. And Dogen said to her in that moment that if she would accept that would allow her suffering to be relieved in some way as well. And I say to you that in this moment, that doesn't give you any satisfaction, because I know it doesn't. The loss of a person we love is just, too much for a story to solve. But I will say to you that that is the truth, that loss, that impermanence is suchness. And the only way for you to accept that is to, a bit like I feel the monk who immolated himself did, go deeper into it a bit. Really feel and understand where your feelings of grief are coming from. Your loved one isn't in suffering any longer. Your loved one is in complete perfection. You are suffering because of your loss. You miss them. You want to spend time with them. All the things you talked about before. But understand that in this moment, you can have memories of that person and experience that joy in this moment and live it. And you don't have to think about the future without. You don't have to think about the past that you had with them. You only need to experience this moment, and the memories that you have are enough to take you forward. And that's what I would say to you. And I wonder if Jane has anything to add, because Jane has obviously a lot of thoughts on this topic, and I think it's important to hear from her.
I lost Peter last year in January 4th, and I could put the feelings aside a lot until I started getting close to January 4th, and that makes me feel really sad. But the thing that I found is not to cling to memories, not to cling to the thoughts, but to let your thoughts go through, like Suzuki Roshi said, when these memories and thoughts and sad feelings come, leave the back door open and help them to leave. That's a good version of it. So there's no way you can change things once somebody has gone, but it is hard. It's very hard. But on the other hand, I lost my brother, who was a year older than me when I was 35, and he was 36, or was I 34 and 35? And that was really hard too. And I couldn't understand why it could happen so suddenly. Like, I saw him when my father told me he was sick. I went to see him, and he was joking with other people in the Coca-Cola room. I found him just standing there joking because he was such a genial person. He loved people and he loved talking to people. So there he was in his last days talking to people in the recreation room, and he was just having a good time. They were laughing with him. And I saw him, but then I gave him Suzuki Roshi's book to read, and he did read some of it, but not all of it. And that probably, it didn't help him at all, or maybe it did for later, I don't know. But anyway, 4 days later, he was gone. So, that's just,
Spencer, do you have anything to add?
Nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Aviza, I hope that was somewhat helpful, but
yeah.
Can I make a real quick statement?
oh, yep.
24 years ago, I woke up and found my wife had died in her sleep. And it was a shock. And I didn't handle it well. I became a drunk for a while and did all this other stupid stuff. And friends of mine finally got me to recover from it. It's one of the reasons why I came here. Grief eventually goes away. And in some ways you don't want it to, but it does go away. You don't forget them. You can't.
That's true.
But it doesn't hurt anymore. And
I can actually laugh at some of the things he
yeah,
said.
it's you eventually get to the point where you still think about them,
Yeah.
but it no longer is painful. It's just you think of the happy things. The bad things you just kind of stick away and don't ever bring them out again. But it took me a while, but I still remember my wife. We were together for 20 years and stuff. And it just, the grief will end, and it will just be a cherished memory at that point. So maybe it's one of those things that you just gotta let flower first, and then eventually it'll take you. You'll be okay.
And something happens to you afterwards, you change in ways you never expected.
Actually, I do have some thoughts. So, when people pass, and we're attached to people, and two things usually happen: either we're so attached that we're consumed with grief, or we push off that grief, and then we're consumed with the shadow of that grief, right? Or we practice and we change ourselves and we change our relationship with grief, which is something different. But, grief, the way we handle it in society now, it's something you need to deal with yourself, or you deal with. But it's something that's dealt with in other society. It's distributed. The grief, the burden of grief is shouldered by the family, by the community, and so the structure of that grief is understood, it's realized, empathized with, and it dissipates through community. So the individual is given the space for their journey through grief. So
Yeah, and I think the Sangha is amazingly important. It helps because everybody knew Peter and loved Peter. And that helped me a lot, just to know it, not so much to feel it myself, but to just appreciate that everyone did feel that way. It made me feel terrific.
And to conclude, Aviza, I just want to say that I would encourage you, in addition to the Sangha, that if you are having, problems dealing with the loss of another, to, reach out to I find that groups of individuals who have experienced what you're experiencing, being led by a professional or similar, is very helpful. And I would encourage you to do that. Remember, I want people to remember something. This is something that, Spencer and I have talked about before, and I think it's important here, especially for everybody to hear, is that Zen is not a substitute for mental health, care. It is helpful for, but it is not a substitute for, and please don't ever take it as that. I would encourage you to remember that while this is helpful to your mental health, if you're having issues, you should definitely seek some professional help. It's important. Anyone else? Was there something over here?
If I could just tag on there.
Hang on one second. We have somebody in the room and I'll get back to you. Hang on just a second.
I just wanted to say something about the Dogen story you mentioned, the lady going to the different houses. One benefit of that as well is for her to learn that she's not alone in her suffering.
Well, that is the purpose of it. That's a soul, to learn that, that is suchness, that everyone is experiencing that. That is life. That is life. Chris, you're up.
Sort of just to tag on to what Zen is not, and that's based on I think it's a fairly frequent misconception, confusing things like pain or grief with suffering. Grief is not suffering. Pain is not suffering. If we ever experience grief or pain, it is not an indication that we're not doing Buddhist practice right. Zen would not have us bypass grief. Zen would not have us never be in pain. The practice of Buddhism is about relating to, responding to, being with completely pain, grief, loss, every aspect of human life.
Deeper into, not avoiding, like the immolating monk.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's probably our time for today. I really appreciate it. I know we went over, but I think it was a good discussion. I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much.